everyone here today. Welcome to the Finance and Appropriations Committee. Today is February 10th, 2021. So first and foremost, what we'll do is a call to order. You have the time again at 4:04.
Yeah, I have that. Yes, sir.
All right. If we can call for attendees.
Board Member Brown. Board Member Cole.
Present.
Mr. Green.
Here.
Ms. Johnson.
Here.
Mr. Jordan. Mr. Miller. And Board Member Ragland.
Here.
You have 4 members and you have a quorum.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. We'll move on to approval of the minutes. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Awesome. Moved and seconded.
Board Member Cole.
Yes.
Mr. Green.
Yes.
Ms. Johnson.
Yes.
And Board Member Ragland.
Yes.
That motion carried.
All right. Thank you. Now, just today, we're going to go through a number of action items. The first is a discussion on the federal grants related to COVID-19 pandemic. Then we'll move to approving consultancy for the facilities master plan, that budget, that's that appropriation for that. And then we'll receive our January 2021 finance report and then move for adjournment. So let's begin with our pandemic related federal funding.
And that will be Catherine Mosier to do that presentation.
All right, Dr. Mosier.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for giving me a few minutes on your agenda this afternoon. I am bringing for you a high-level overview of work that we have been able to do in the district as a result of funds related to the pandemic. Give me just a moment as I set my screen. Okay, I think that's better. In order to respond to the unique needs created as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, Congress has approved a number of new grants to support needs in schools. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to discuss funds that Columbus City Schools has received to date to address the impact that COVID-19 has had and continues to have on our elementary and secondary schools. I apologize in advance. This is one of those presentations with lots of acronyms, but the 3 most important are the ones that you'll see right here on your screen. CARES, or what we call CARES funding, the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Funds, Coronavirus Relief Fund, CRF, and then ESSER 1 and ESSER 2. As you'll see in more detail in the next slide, Congress has provided a number of new grants to schools in response to the pandemic. These fall generally under an umbrella that we refer to as CARES dollars. They are intended to help schools prevent, prepare, and respond to COVID-19. This chart provides a list of all of our funding, new funding, with the various deadlines to use the dollars. The majority of these funds are geared towards K through 12 schools, but a couple of things to point out. Columbus City Schools has benefited from some of the funds available for higher education. In our case, these are our adult education programs. Our great partners at the City of Columbus granted a portion of their CARES dollars to support the needs of students in Columbus City Schools. The first 5 boxes in sources listed have been received in the district. The CARES, CRF, and broadband dollars have been spent. Our ESSER 1 dollars have been allocated, and we're in the process of using those funds now according to our plan. The ESSER 2 and FEMA sources at the bottom of the chart are pending. We anticipate receiving those funds according to a formula the state has released, but the application for those funds has not yet opened. So again, you see on the chart what we anticipate receiving, but is not yet finalized. One anecdote that I would point out to you, as you can see, the CRF and broadband, as well as the City of Columbus CARES dollars have been spent. Just before the initial deadline, which was December 30 of 2020, we received word, the federal government released information that actually they were going to extend the deadline to use those funds for a whole nother year. Unfortunately, we were not notified of that until about a week before the original deadline. And so we utilized those dollars according to what we had previously been told was the deadline. In fact, those dollars are now extended through 2021. And as you can see, the ESSER 1 dollars spending deadline is September 30th of 2022. Those anticipated dollars that I spoke about will take us through September of 2023. I'm going to take you through what we have received and spent under the first 3 sub-grants. Again, that's that deadline that I told you changed. But here's what we've actually done with those dollars so far. We have purchased laptops for teachers. Of course, that was necessary when we moved to a fully remote instructional delivery platform. We have provided Chromebooks for students to use as they learn at home. Lots and lots of plexiglass. If you enter any of our school buildings, if you take a peek inside any of our school buses, certainly those of you who venture into the building at 270 East State Street have become familiar with new plexiglass partitions, barriers that have been set up. And additionally, we have purchased iPads for students for whom the Chromebook was not sufficient to meet their needs. For higher education, safety glasses, gowns, headphones. It's an example here, this blood pressure simulator with iPod technology. Our higher education students who again, are adults in our adult education program have continued to receive in-person instruction. So the equipment to keep them safe was certainly prioritized. Hotspots. We have been able to provide hotspots for families throughout the city to help support their students as they learn in a remote environment. And again, as I spoke before, through partnership with our generous friends at City of Columbus, we were able to provide 20,000 Chromebooks to students. The city approved the use of a portion of the CARES funds they received to directly impact the needs of our students. Certainly the largest grant that we received in response to the pandemic are our ESSER funds. As you can see, we've received over $30 million. We have a spending plan that takes us through September 30th of 2022. You see on the screen some examples of resources that are now available in the district thanks to this funding. A couple of things that I would point out to you there. There's certainly, we focused heavily in this grant on safety and ensuring that our buildings were safe, that students and teachers had the equipment that they needed to keep them safe. Millions of disinfecting wipes and gloves, certainly hand sanitizer. Additional supports have been provided to custodial services in the form of additional time for custodians, as well as spray triggers and bottles. Also, we added a digital academy, which is a all online learning delivery system. We have several thousand students involved in that digital academy, and we have funded that program through these dollars. You may also remember that we delayed the start of school this year for 2 weeks and provided 10 days of professional development for all employees related to teaching in an online environment, and as well as meeting the social emotional needs of students and adults as we respond to the pandemic. Additionally, we had professional development specific to the needs of English learners and students who were disproportionately impacted by remote delivery. We do actually understand that additional funds may be coming. The second elementary and secondary school relief grant, known as ESSER 2, was approved at the end of the calendar year. The application for this grant will open this month, and we are anxiously anticipating completing that application and working with the state to receive our funding. We also know that the governor has funds that are referred to as Gears 1 and Gears 2, and those may support additional summer and extended day programs. And of course, in the news, we hear about additional Biden funds, or perhaps it will be the Senate counteroffer version that is still to come. Right now, they're very far apart in terms of the dollars, but we do anticipate that schools will receive another round of funding beyond what I've shared as anticipated so far. We understand that there will also be some additional higher education grants, and again, our adult education programs would qualify for those. And while the first grants have focused very much on the operational needs of schools to provide for safety and virus prevention, the future funds we expect will be focused on learning recovery strategies to address learning gaps that have only grown during the pandemic. We anticipate that new social emotional supports will be necessary as students move between remote, hybrid, and eventually in-person learning. The administration has begun a process to plan, but again, the application for those funds is not yet available. As I close and open for any questions, just draw your attention in the executive summary in board docs. There is a link to what I found to be a very helpful and comprehensive article that gives a great overview of the various funds and shares with you the amount that each state actually has received as part of their fund, the total federal funding package. And with that, I sorry, I'm trying to share my screen. Forgive me here for just 1 minute. But I'll take here. Any questions that you might have?
Thank you so much for that presentation, Ms. Mosier. Are there any questions for the good doctor?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the presentation, Dr. Mosier. I am asking specifically about our potential for GEARS funding and what that may look like. You mentioned the learning loss over the pandemic and summer programming. It would be my hope that our summer programming would be far more robust than anything that we've ever done here with Columbus City Schools, and that GEARS funding would certainly help us get to more toward what we want to see. That process, what is the process to attain the GEARS funding? Can you explain whether or not the governor will be addressing the potential need of our district versus some of the other districts around the state? Could we have a more weighted reception of funds? I mean, could we get more because we need more, essentially? If you could explain that for me, that would be really helpful. Thank you again.
Board Member Ragland, thank you. I see Eric Roush turned his camera on, so I'm going to have him respond to the first part of that question, and then I certainly want to talk about summer.
Thank you very much for the question. I think at this point we're waiting to see what the governor's process is going to be. There's about, I think, around $26 million left from the Gear 1 funds. I don't believe that the governor has identified yet how to expend any of the Gear 2 funding. A lot of the money that was in Gear 2 actually went out to the non-public schools through a different distribution mechanism, but they kind of flowed through Gear 2 under that particular act. I think that we're going to probably see a lot more when the governor's budget, we see the actual budget language coming out here in the next, hopefully later this week, but if not, then probably next week, that will have some additional information on what the Gear 1 funds will explicitly be used for, as well as how to access those particular dollars.
In a meeting just prior to this one, I had an opportunity to see a preview of what we're planning for this summer. And I know that the board will be excited to hear that presentation. I believe that's coming at the next full board meeting next week. In addition to the district programs supported through GEARS or through CARES, remember that we also allocate Title I dollars to schools, and they are in the process of identifying additional enrichment and intervention programs for students. As you said, certainly at a faster pace and more robust than what we have seen in past summers.
All right. Thank you for that. If you don't, you have another one, Mr. Ragland? Okay, awesome.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Board Member Brown, next. You had a comment, and good to see you.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to thank Catherine and the rest of you who are responsible for this report. It's a good one. It's helpful. It certainly lays out the information clearly. And I've never seen a report of this nature before. It may be that we didn't have all these different funds in the past, and these are mostly COVID related or entirely, but it is useful and helpful. So thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any additional questions?
Chair Cole?
Yes, sir.
Just an added comment. Recalling the last Finance Committee meeting, one of the questions I think perhaps that you had posed was not only an update on these federal dollars that are coming to us for COVID-related expenditures. The question was, how has this impacted our general fund and therefore our 5-year forecast? And I just wanted to share with you that at this point, this is all supplemental in nature.
Yes, very much so.
The masks, the sanitizers, the plexiglass, all of those steps and measures have been supplemental items that were not planned for because, well, we didn't plan for a pandemic. And depending upon, as you can see, some of these monies last until 22 or 23. Depending upon how this pandemic continues and how our response to it continues, those dollars may be available to help defray those expenses. But should they expire and yet we still have to maintain some protocols, that will be something that may get factored into later years in the forecast. But that all still needs to be planned out. And I've been pretty rigorous in my conversations with Catherine and others about don't create recurring expenditures out of non-recurring income. And then I modified that and said to them one day, unless we plan for it. Because one of the things that I think that they are considering as well is that there may be programmatic responses that these dollars could serve as a jumpstart to, and that we could get a year or two paid for with federal dollars, responding as Catherine outlined, say, for instance, closing that learning gap. And if those programs prove fruitful, we may wish to continue them. And if so, we simply just have to plan for that in year 3 or 4 down the road to add that into the general fund. So we're thinking of it holistically. We're thinking of it long term. They're very well aware. I speak it like it's we and they, but the academic side, not the financial side. The academic side is being very mindful of the longer term fiscal impacts of some of the programs that we might put into place. So I just want to let you know that to date, no impact on the 5-year forecast. Won't see anything in the May forecast reflected, but as Catherine and her team and others work on a long-term plan, they may very well come up and say, we like this program, let's plan on continuing it. And then in the fall, perhaps at the November forecast, we build something in. So I wanted to go full circle on what the genesis of this request was, to talk about the federal programs related to our response to the COVID-19 pandemic.
And certainly, if it would be helpful to the committee, I can come back in a couple of months when we have more clarity on what that ESSER 2 and any additional funds will look like, and share with you our plan as it will take us through at least September of 2023.
We look forward to that update. We'll definitely welcome you back.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. Moving on, we have the Facilities Master Plan, the FNP consultant contract. Is that going to be Mr. Gooding?
Sorry, Chairman Cole, I was just going to unmute myself a second. We're going to turn this over to Dr. Stanford and Alex Trevino to present their request for additional funds.
Thank you for that.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity. I will be presenting on behalf of Dr. Stanford this afternoon. So we are quite pleased to bring forward this recommendation or request for a budget to be able to restart our facility master plan work. So just to give you a little bit of background, so many of you probably know, but maybe not all of you, that this work really started back in our district back in 2000, when the district initially adopted its first facility master plan back in 2002. There were some minor tweaks made to it along the way, but there really was no comprehensive rework of it until 2016, when that work was also taken up. And so as we have now moved into 2020 and now 2021, we did restart the discussion with the administration last summer about the need to really restart this work. So we did approach our partners over at the Ohio Facilities Construction Commission as we kind of charted this course. They would always recommend that their partner local school districts partner with a local planner to be able to do this facility master planning work. So after consulting with them, we did go ahead and issue our own request for qualifications, which we did back in August of 2020. We had 8 firms that responded to that qualifications request. We ultimately shortlisted 5 of those firms and interviewed them, and we have come up with a consensus recommendation for a contract for one of those firms that we interviewed. And so hence we are before you today to request the funds to be able to move into that contract. So at this point, we have negotiated a contract with the firm that we interviewed. I am not going to name that firm as that information is not public until the board takes action on that contract next week. But the amount we're requesting is enough to cover that contract for roughly about a 12 to 14 month engagement, which will take us all through community engagement, as well as their own planning services. They'll be doing evaluations of our existing facilities, coordinating with the state, again, with the OFCC, as we're bringing that final plan together. Again, lots of community engagement, but particularly focused on the front end as we really seek to engage with the community to get their feedback. And then after they've done kind of their deep dive into the actual work, again in the fall, really focusing on how to get to those results that are going to really move the needle for our district. I think those are all the highlights that I have for you. I will certainly entertain any questions that you might have about the process or anything else relative to the budget request.
Are there any questions from the committee? I do have one. Is that, are you raising your hand? Boardman? Okay. You're playing with your camera, and sometimes I can't tell if you're raising your hand or not. I guess one of my questions is are we able to mention any details, any details that don't necessarily name the firm, but at least cite them possibly as a certain type of business? Are we allowed to mention any designations, whether it's a LEDE, those types of things? Are we not allowed to mention that at all?
I think I can give you some generalities without getting into too much of specifics. I don't think it's any mystery that the firms that are typically going to come after this work are generally planners by nature. So there's a whole series of firms that really kind of specialize in this kind of work. So this is a firm that specializes in exactly that kind of work. The firm themselves are they're a decent sized firm with a local office. The firm themselves are not LEDE, but they have really worked hard to go out of their way to make sure they have a very significant LEDE component to this contract.
Okay, thank you very much for that. If there aren't any other questions, are we required to move on this to put this in front of the board? I know there's going to come before the Board of Education regardless, but.
Yeah, Chairman Cole, the next step for this is if FAC is okay moving this forward, this will become part of the amended appropriations that the board will receive at their next regularly scheduled board meeting. We'll have the 800,000 increase in there that you'll see at the board meeting.
All right, then understanding that this is a pivotal part of the FMP process for how capital improvements and or closures or new builds are determined, is there a motion to move this forward to the Board of Education?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we forward the request from the group of the $800,000 to the Board of Education for review and approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, moved and seconded.
Mr. Green?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Board Member Ragland?
Yes.
Board Member Brown?
Yes.
And Chair Cole?
Yes.
That motion carried.
All right, thank you so very much for that. Now, Mr. Treasurer, you have the floor for the January finance report.
Thank you very much. Okay, good afternoon, and this is the monthly financial report for January. You're reviewing this today, and it will go to the full board at their next board meeting on February 16th. Very similar picture as in the previous months. Year-to-date revenues are up and year-to-date expenditure above plan, and year-to-date expenditures are below below plan. The year-to-date revenue variance is down a bit from last month. It's about 25 million, 4.3% above plan. Last month, we were at about 28 million above plan, or 6.2% above. Year-to-date expenditure variance has grown. We are now about 56 million under plan, or 9.7%. And last month, it was about 48 million under plan, or 9.6%. So the percentage stayed fairly close, but the dollar amount grew. Our cash balance has increased to about 81 million above plan, and it stood at about 77 million above plan last month. Getting a picture of the cash balance, you can see that after the first quarter variations due to the delay in the property tax settlement, the delay in the date that the payment date for taxes were due, we kind of recovered from that, and the cash balance is trending as it has in the past, but albeit above what the plan called for. Highlights for revenue. Property tax advances began in January. As you know, bills went out, and they'll be due here, I believe, in the month of February. We began receiving advances on that, and those came in very much on plan. For the month, we were within about $768,000 of what we had estimated. State funding is still 17 million year to date ahead of plan. And as you can recall, last month we received that one-time $19 million Bureau of Workers' Compensation dividend payment. Other revenues, about 4.3 million above plan year to date. Again, pilots and investment income lead the way. They, in fact, though, were about 1.6 million under plan for the month, which were the major contributors to this category being 1.8 million under for the month. Graphically, you see our three major revenue sources there. Property taxes running just slightly ahead, state revenue up a bit, and then all other revenues fairly close, but again, slightly above plan. Looking at the flow of state revenue, just to show you the impact of that $19 million dividend payment in the month of December that skewed this flow. There's the monthly flow without the dividend, and you can see that we better approximate the equal monthly flow model than what would history indicate to us, which was the basis for our current monthly plan. On a year-to-date basis, you'll see that these variances are both above plan, about 21 million above plan against the equal monthly flow model, and about 17 million, as I said, above our current plan, which is based upon historical behavior. Taking that 19 million out, we would have been very close to plan. On the one hand, against the equal flow model, we would have been about 1.6 million above plan, and against the current plan, we would run about 2.6 million below. So give or take a couple million, we would have been very close to our plans. One of the recent announcements you may have heard, I think it was a couple of Fridays ago, that the governor said that they would restore, do a partial restoration of the FY20 reductions. As you might recall, we were flat funded in FY20 from FY19 levels, but then late in FY20, due to the pandemic, I was going to say received. I'm not sure what word to use. We were blessed is not the word either. But anyway, we had to endure a almost $9.2 million reduction in the last few months of the fiscal year. Now, we did not bear the full brunt of that because the reduction also impacted the community schools. I believe for the ones that we are involved with, that deduction was lowered approximately 2 million. So our net was around 7 million impact in FY20. That reduction carried forward into FY21, and what the governor ordered was a change in that reduction from as you can see here, from about 9.2 million to 4.1 million, meaning that at a gross level, we would pick up about $5 million. However, because community schools suffered from a reduction as well in FY20, they too will benefit from a reduction in the reduction, I guess is the best way to put that. And they're having about $48.68 per pupil restored. My estimate, I used the number of community school pupils in our January #2 payment, calculation, and it's just simple multiplication, we should see an increase in that deduction of about $1 million for the balance of the year. So overall for this fiscal year, we should net about $4 million due to increase in state funding as a result of that governor's announcement. We should see the change in state funding in our February 1 payment, and then the community school deduction will kick in for the February 2 payment. I didn't ask this question, but typically the way state accounting works, if it is in our favor, they tend to catch us up right at that payment. So we may see a large revenue number. If it's not in our favor, they tend to spread out those reductions over the balance of the year. So I suspect that perhaps the community school deduction might get spread out over the balance of the fiscal year. So we won't see an exact $4 million flip right now. We might see something closer to 5 million in revenue and a smaller adjustment in the deduction. By the time we get to the end of the fiscal year, though, that will all balance itself out. Getting into those other revenue categories, although it's hard to see on this graph because it is a very small amount, we did receive one of the reimbursements for our Q-Scubies, our qualified school construction bonds. As you might recall also, we get 2 a year. The second one in fiscal year 20 didn't arrive. So we think this one is that one. So it came over in fiscal year 21. So we're still expecting 2 more for fiscal year 21. The feds seem to be rather slow in processing right about now. So we're expecting 2 more, even though the plan calls, it would be a total of 3 in the year, 3 reimbursements, even though the plan calls for just 2. Property tax allocation, no change this month, no activity. Other revenues, it was up about 6.2 million year to date last month. We're now up about 4.3 million. As I said, other investment income and pilots came in under plan for the month, which pulled that year to date variance down. And other financing sources, no significant change from last month. A reminder of our heat map, ranging from very favorable to very unfavorable. And they are in reverse direction depending upon whether you're talking about revenues or expenditures. We'll just point out that plus or minus $5 million gets you in that anywhere from moderately unfavorable to moderately favorable, and includes being on plan. And the percent variance, plus or minus 5%, will keep you in that moderately favorable to moderately unfavorable area, with plus or minus 2% being on plan. When we look at the revenue heat map for the month, I can tell you when you look back and compare to last month, we have more on-plan indicators this month than last, and there was a pretty good drop in the number of very unfavorable heat indicators from this month from last month. On the expenditure side, personnel was under plan in January, about $4.5 million, $3.2 million in salaries and wages, and $1.2 million in benefits. Overall, personnel is about 7% under plan. Year to date, you can see 25.2 million, 19 million of that in salaries and wages, and 6 million of that in benefits. I'm starting to look towards the end of the year, and so I'm trying to use this data and trend it out in my mind. I've not put any pencil and paper really to it, but if we would run about a 7% under plan through the balance of the year, that would yield a favorable variance of about 44.5 million under plan. The first 3 months of this fiscal year, that year-to-date variance was running about 11 to maybe 17% under plan in that first 3 months. And then the last 4 months, the year-to-date variance on a percentage basis has been in that 6 to 7% range. So that seems to be what we might consistently do. That will change and probably move more towards the 3% to 2% under plan as we come back to school. As we move to, into hybrid more regularly, when staff is, some of the staff is required to work overtime, put more hours in, whatever, that should bring our expenditures more back in line on a monthly basis to what the plan would call for. So I'm just looking at the trends. When we get, obviously as the months go by, we know more. But I just want to give you an idea, a ballpark of what that 7% variance, if it would hold true, would mean to us by the end of the year. Obviously, a 2 to 3% variance would be less than half of that by year end. Purchase services, about $1.8 million under plan month to date. On a year to date basis, you can see there about 17.2 million. Again, as in last month, professional technical services, property services, electricity, internet access, and tuition to other districts top those year to date variances, and they range anywhere from 2 million to 2.7 million for each line under plan. Only one line in purchase services is running over plan year to date, and that's telephone services, and it's $56,000 over plan. And because we base the forecast on budgeted amounts, and because we know we don't fully spend our budgets, these variances are in a direction and magnitude that we might expect. So this isn't a cause to say, well, what aren't we doing? It's simply that we typically budget higher than what is needed in overall expenses. Charter, about 375,000 under month to date. And again, that's going to change late February and then for the balance of the year. So that 5.4 million year to date under plan will likely dissipate a little bit because I mentioned we're going to have that increase in the deduction due to the governor's announcement about the restoration of the previous reduction. Supplies and materials, now 3.8 million under plan year to date, 900,000 under month to date. Software and fuel are running under, they're the leaders, 1.4 million and 2.2 million under plan respectively. And textbooks are a supply item that are still over plan. And as I mentioned to you, that's a previous large textbook purchase, and that was really a timing issue. Capital outlay, about 650,000 under plan month to date. Again, mainly in the technical equipment line, 5.3 million year to date under plan. Graphically here, personnel stands out pretty well as being under plan, a very large expenditure for us and a pretty good under plan variance. Charter, close. Other expenditures, when we blow those out, you can see purchase services leads the way there, both in dollar amount and percentage that we're keeping an eye on. Getting to the variance heat map, no real change from last year on a year-to-date basis. Still very favorable in terms of those year-to-date variances against the plan, which, as I mentioned before, is our budgeted amounts. Want to compare to last year and keep that in mind because fiscal year 21 and has been an odd year. And we've had more months now under the pandemic in this fiscal year than we did last. So as you can see here, total revenue is now about 3% over where we were last year. Last month, it was about 5.6% over. I would point out, look at the state aid number, about 12.2 million above last year. And keep in mind, that reflects the 19.2 million in the Bureau of Workers' Comp dividend. If we hadn't received that, we'd probably be about 7 million behind last year. And that's because we're suffering from a reduction in the first 6 months of this year, first 7 months of the year, which we didn't have to endure in fiscal year 20. Some of that will dissipate as we get into the latter months once that reduction kicks in our prior year data. On the expenditure side, personnel now about 4.5 million behind where we were at this time last year. It was about 2 million behind last month. Total expenditures are now 4.3 million more, about 0.8% more than last year at this time. In January, that number was 7.2 million or 1.6 million over last year, I'm sorry. Total expenditures, last month were about 8 million over last year, 1.8%. That's dropped. We're down to 5.4 over last year and just a 1.1 increase over last year. So if you think about in fiscal year 20, which was July of 19 through February of 20, all pre-pandemic, our expenditures this year pretty much so far match those, and our revenue's up a little bit. So it'll be interesting to see how that comparison works out in the coming months once we get into comparing to February of 20 and beyond once the pandemic set in. Breaking out salaries and wages and fringe benefits in that total personnel number, you'll see here that salaries and wages down about 1.7% versus last year. Fringe benefits are essentially flat to last year at this time. They were just slightly over last year, last month, so they flipped to under last year, but still very, very small numbers and very small percents change over last year on fringe benefits. So that's the report for January. Year-to-date revenues continue to run above plan. Expenditures continue to run below plan and have increased a little bit below plan, all building up our cash balance as we head down the road. So that's it for my report on January. And as always, I'd be glad to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you always, Mr. Treasurer, for such a thorough report. Are there any questions from the committee at this point in time?
Yes, Chair Cole, I do just have one question. Nice job, Stan. You always do a great job. What do you think caused that increase in the BWC dividend? I assume it's COVID. You know, no one's going to work, and so the claims are.
To be honest with you, I have no idea. We marvel at the fact that we usually get refunds equivalent to our premiums. We get those every year.
Mm-hmm.
And then we get this really large dividend. And I don't know that I read any press. I don't know if Eric Rausch got any, has heard anything. It's remarkable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't get it.
I do not have a firm rationale for that. I've not really researched or delved into that. I think Ms. Johnson, I think that your theory is probably as good as any others. I believe that to some extent the investments have been performing fairly well, or were performing well. I'm sure part of it. I can, I guess, do suppositions as well. I mean, part of it could also be that if the fund is itself solvent enough to be able to generate or allow BWC to give some of those rebates back, that of course is money back in the pockets of the businesses. So, I think Board Member Brown may actually have an answer. So,
and he turned himself off. You're muted, Board Member Brown.
Uh-oh.
He was doing so well. He was unmuted there when you called on him, Eric, and then we lost him.
I'm ready to sing the Mr. Rogers theme.
Yeah.
Or
I could go over and bring up a cat filter if you'd like. Eric, we still can't hear you.
Feel free to.
You can press the space bar.
Right.
Keep it pressed.
Feel free to type
There
it
we
in
go.
the chat.
Okay. Yeah, that's good.
Okay, I have no idea what happened, but and I was just about to complete a text to you all. Anyway, I don't have the answer, but I can check and probably obtain it from my daughter. Burl not only is Gahanna School Board, but she's also the chief ombudsperson at the workers' comp system.
Oh, great! Yes,
and
that would be a pretty good source.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd say, and I probably could have texted her at the time it took me to try to get on, but I'm happy to send something back. I assume they got some back as well.
Oh, thank you for that. Are there any additional queries? Okay.
Uh,
Go ahead.
Chair Cole, I do have some information on that. The Bureau intentionally provided those type of dividends for COVID-19 purposes to help employers.
Got you. Thank you for that, Mr. Barnes. Considering that there are no additional queries, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All right, it has been moved and seconded.
Okay, Ms. Johnson,
Yes.
Board Member Ragland,
Yes.
Board Member Brown,
Yes.
Board Member Cole,
Yes.
and Mr. Green.
Yes.
That motion passed. Carried.
All right. Well, I thank you all in closing. Thank you so much for your continued service. Thank you so much for helping us move our appropriations process forward. And we look forward to continuing to serve you throughout the year. So we are always the second Wednesday of the month between 4 and until. I'll say 4 until. But we look forward to seeing you next month again. You all be well.
Thank you.
Thank you all.